welcome to Varn Vlog. And today I'm going to respond to a bunch of comments and some criticism that I've been getting lately. It's funny because I usually go into the numbers on these kinds of things, and I've been getting a lot of critique of not going into detail when I'm talking about stuff in abstract philosophical language. I mean, part of this is the critics doing the thing that I was actually talking about people doing, which is differentiating through constant criticism to make their own niche, trying to make everyone do what they do and what they want them to do until they get their own niche and they can't solve the problems at hand. Now, people will say, and a commenter named Rosalind Ape has said that I am beholden to soft empiricism, and these things are silly. In a 15-minute video, you cannot expect someone to go into the specific analysis of every part of the economy. But there were some criticisms that I thought that needed to be dealt with. One of the problems with even talking about the judiciary versus the administrative state is that different agencies in the administrative state have vastly different allegiances and political valences in regards to what elements of capital want them and what don't. So, for example, petite bourgeois people don't like the IRS. It's kind of a mess. If you've ever had to deal with the IRS, if you have to do anything beyond standard filing your taxes, it operates on very bizarre lines. I mean, it's a agency that literally if you have to pay it, it often requires antiquated means. It makes you go through all kinds of rigmarole just to set up a payment plan, etc. This could be modernized. It is not modernized for two reasons. One, it's underfunded. Two, there's an entire industry that is developed as an intermediary with it. But then there's three. There's the fact that there are contradictory laws and expectations and administrative guidelines that run throughout the IRS. Now, states do two things. They administrate the legitimacy of violence and they take taxes. And if they can't do those two things, they're not really a valid state anymore. So why is it that one of the world hegemonies has a tax code system that's like broken? We think about this, we get into other areas, like why are there more and more administrators that are there to soften the interaction with legal code? This was something that one of the commenters, Rosalind Ape, said that I think is valid. Let's just look at, for example, what the Bureau of Labor Statistics, my favorite site when I go to this stuff, is going to say about the growth of HR in America. Now, it's already grown a lot, but it's expected to grow 6% in the next 10 years faster than average. Now, HR, from the standpoint of production, is a money suck. It's not even particularly useful from the standpoint of financialization. So why is it growing so fast? And that's because the legal code is actually requiring this to grow. When I used to say that I don't believe in David Graeber's bullshit jobs, it's because the bullshit jobs are not like created by as a conspiracy of the managerial elite. Only someone from the elite in academia would think that. It's that various systems are becoming overly complicated and overly mediated to the point that you need more and more people, actual real people, to deal with them. I mean, HR specialists are not actually super high paid. They're slightly above the median pay in the United States. On average, they make about $67,000 a year. That's hardly in the top 1%. But when you see that as a growing part of the entire business apparatus, you see that that's just a money suck. And on top of that, there's an entire panoply of consultants and whatnot that go on that. When I used to work for education during the Bush administration, I still work in education, by the way, but it's very different now. One of the things that you would do to get out of trouble when you fell under AYP, annually progress, was to hire more consultants. And the consultants were one-time expenditure, but often the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So hiring a consultant would actually cost more than hiring a teacher. But the teacher was a long-term commitment, the consultant wasn't. So you would lay off teachers, hire the consultant, and then not replace them. And this eventually led to things like the shrinking of about 25% of the teacher workforce, and then it becoming a discredited profession as a non-stable profession, because that was the one thing it had going for it in the 20th century, is teaching after the reforms of the 50s, after the baby boomers, was a stable profession. People did it, even though it paid less, because it had good benefits, which it does in some states, but not in most of them anymore. One thing that I hear, for example, is I'll hear Michael Lynn talk about how teachers are PMC but they're kind of in a weird spectrum because they're close to the working class and they deal with the general public, but that they are not, but that they have good pensions and whatnot. They do in California and New York, but they actually don't in most states. All right. There's a radical difference between those sectors. So when we look at something like the human resource specialist, we have to ask a question. This is a similar question that we have to ask in the expansion of teacher administration. And I've talked about this for a long time. We spend double the amount of money on education that we did 20 years ago. And that's adjusted for inflation. We throw more money at education than ever. Teachers have actually seen a pay decline in relative to inflation for 20 years. 93% of all money spent in education is on personnel. It's a labor-heavy industry. It costs a lot to do. So, why is it that it's doubled when the main workforce makes less money relative to the taxes? And the answer to that is the cost of administrative consulting has astronomically increased. The problem with that is that really is bureaucratic and legal drift. We actually do need those positions, some of them anyway, to actually document and do all the paperwork required to meet more and more regulatory capture. This is why liberal dependence on regulation really is a problem. It is an energy suck. It is a money suck. All right. Now, no one has an incentive to fix this, just like I said in my other video. Why don't they have an incentive to fix this? Because it would put them out of a job. One of the things I've talked about in regards to healthcare, one of the things that makes healthcare hard to fix is that so much of the auxiliary, frankly, not particularly necessary if it was efficient, if the field was efficient, work, billers, bill coders, insurance agents, actuaries, etc., are middle-class jobs. These are the kinds of middle-class jobs that working-class people have used to get a slight up on the income scale, particularly because they often don't require a huge amount of education. If you get rid of them, what do you replace them with? Now, in a very real way, this makes all that administration a money suck on the social totality. And this actually drives a lot of well-meaning proletarian people into conservative hands. What do you do about that? Most attempts that the government has to fix the problem actually tend to exacerbate it. For example, during the passing of the ACA, there was an attempt to streamline medical documentation. It was supposed to make it where we needed less people to do all that medical documentation. And that didn't happen. Meeting the requirements actually created whole new jobs, and then those jobs maintain themselves. There is a bureaucratic drift here. I'm well aware of that situation. So we have to ask ourselves, what does this say about the nature of capital? Someone's asked me about real subsumption, about the informal economic laws. And this is both true, kind of, but people make too much of it. So let's go into what real subsumption is, because a lot of people throw it around without knowing what it means. It was popular in left communist terminology back in the day. All right. Process of production of capital, draft of chapter 6 of capital, results of direct production process. This was actually kind of dropped. This is a lot of, like, Negri and a lot of other theorists made a lot of this. It was a big deal for endnotes. It's actually was never that big so in Marx himself. So I always find it interesting that everyone relies so much on it. There's like these few passages in Marx that come up over and over and over again that people abuse. The direct results of production process is the third draft of Capital, which Marx wrote between the summer of 1863 and the summer of 1864, based on a plan Marx made for the work in December 1862. The manuscript has been lost. Apart from a few pages, which would have become the first 5 chapters of Capital, some related footnotes, and what became the 6th chapter. The pagination and context of the 6th chapter indicates that it followed from the 5 previous chapters. And by the time Capital was completed, however, this chapter was not included. The content of the chapter ranges over a variety of subjects, but most particularly deals in greater detail than with elsewhere. 1, the formal and real subsumption, the later process of capital, and 2, the productive and unproductive labor. Now, productive and unproductive labor becomes an entire book in and of itself. It's what theories of surplus value is all about, as in parts of Capital Volume 1 and 2. But formal and real subsumption is something that a lot of people do a lot with, particularly after 1970s, but it doesn't make it into any of the Marx manuscripts for whatever reason. All right. 1, formal and real subsumption by the labor process by capital. This concept is central to how Marx conceives of how capitalism establishes itself. In the chapter in Capitalism and Primitive Accumulation, Marx shows that generally capitalist accumulation can only take place on the basis of productive forces, which themselves could only arise on the basis of capital. At first, capital draws into itself an existing labor process, techniques, markets, means of production, and workers. Thus, Marx calls formal subsumption, under which the whole labor process continues much as before, but by monopolizing the means of production and therefore the worker's means of subsistence, the capital compels the worker to submit wage labor, and by using the existing market is able to accumulate capital. Okay, that makes sense. But what's the next thing? Capitalism as such, however, cannot develop on a limited basis. It finds as an already existing force of production. The prerequisite for real capitalist labor process can only be created by capital itself. Thus, capital gradually transforms the social relations and modes of labor. This is a reification error, but whatever. Until they become thoroughly imbued with nature and requirements of capital, and the labor process is really subsumed under the capital. This is Marx's solution to the paradox that only capital can create the conditions of capitalist production, productive and unproductive labor. Marx's view on productive and unproductive labor, on which labor expands capital but does not, can be found in Gurdjieff and in Capital and in Theories of Surplus Value. But these references are somewhat scattered. See the glossary. In this chapter, we see an extended examination of the topic including the relationships of service commodities and commodities of science, productive, superlative management, and so on. Marx summed up the confusion of the question of productive and unproductive labor deriving from three sources. One, the fetishistic notion, particularly capitalist mode of production, and arising from its essence, of formal economic determinations, such as that of being a commodity, are being productive labor, are qualities belonging to material repositories of formal determinations or categories in and of themselves. Two, the idea, considering the labor process as such, only labor is productive as a result in a product, a material product. Hence, it is only a question of material wealth. And three, the fact that real productive processes considered from the point of view of real movements, there is a great difference with regard to the formation of wealth between labor is expressed in reproductive articles and labor is expressed in mere luxuries. Students of capital should define this here. Andy Blumen, students of capital should definitely include this in their reading. I don't know why. With those eventually published, and in fact, the Penguin have done, attaching to the appendix of Capital Volume 1, translated by Ben Fawkes, Andy Blumen, 2022. 2002, not 2022. So, what is real subsumption? All right, that's what the footnote says. It's where the entire totality is geared towards the making of profits. Sure. And you can use that to explain a lot. When I say, though, yes, we need to talk about this, but also that it doesn't explain as much as you think because it's at such a level of abstraction that you can just go, well, everything's real subsumed. We can't fight capital through politics anymore because of real subsumption. The working class has been totally subsumed to capital, so we have no need for them to be as the agent of history. So because real subsumption, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is a common pattern. One question that I want to ask people on this is what material thing does this actually explain? Yes, there are abstract forces. Yes, things are generated for profit, but you have to start asking yourself, some of these things are not productive at all. They're not productive labor. They're not productive to general wealth. They are time, effort, and resource sucks. This is what Burnham was talking about in the 1930s and 40s when he wrote his books. Now, Burnham thought that the military would be the managerial elite that would get us out of the situation of the managerial elites. He first wrote his the Managerial Revolution, then he wrote the New Machiavellians, where he picked up all the proto-fascist thinkers around the Italian elite school. They're enjoying a comeback these days, and for not understandable reasons. And he worked out that the military discipline would be where that would come from, and basically predicted that the United States would basically be run like the Eisenhower administration forever, where the elites of business have a relationship to the elites of industry, that they serve as the elites of business and industry have a relationship to the elites of the military, that the military people will serve probably as elected political leaders, and that would structure the foregoing American society. It's kind of the virtuous military republic idea. And remember also that since military leadership could emerge from anyone who got an education, and since conscription was part of the mode of the day, that it was seen that this was a way to pull elites in kind of organically from all over U.S. society. You would have a kind of natural elite aristocracy arising through the military. And that the military itself could cultivate and train these people. That didn't happen, all right, at all. And it's something that people always cite. The managerial elite books don't cite what it actually predicted would happen. And I actually do think you have to hold people accountable for their predictions based off their analysis, right? So, to go into this in a little more detail, ask yourself the question about why all these administrative things are growing. The bullshit jobs answer is usually a bad answer. But there is a sense also that these are self-perpetuating mechanisms. Now, I keep on being asked to talk more about technology. A lot of people read Baudrillard, and a person that people really need to handle on his predictions, because in the early aughts, right before he died, he basically said that the crisis of capital was over, that the computers could solve all the problems of the business cycle. None of that's true. One of the weird things about Baudrillardians is, despite their apocalyptic vision of technology and their weird notions of authenticity, that frankly, their prediction, they overstate the effectiveness of the technology. In some ways, they are like the AI people who are pushing AI is going to destroy us all, so that you'll invest more in it to control it, but also to make it better. Not a great idea. So, yes, there is technological mediation exacerbates all these things. The complexity exacerbates, and the mediation is part of that complexity. But one of the things you have to remember, and this is what the Baudrillardian picture misses, that all requires physical infrastructure. You will never have the computers run everything, because they, as of yet, cannot actually reproduce their physical and energy infrastructure. And AI and whatnot is a major energy suck. It's a lot. There's no, the current parameters in the software don't even have efficiency regulations in them. Hence why they'll make up 1,000 bad answers if the AI can't answer the question. Also, since the AI wants to always give you a positive answer, it has an exacerbated problem of what we saw in the in the replication crisis, first in psychology and general science, because it has a bias against reporting anything negative or saying it doesn't know something. So it'll just make stuff up. Well, I don't know why we're surprised about this. It's mimicking human processes that do the same thing, that had the same incentive structure. And there's a limit to how much this can be trained, because it's going through all the stuff to train it. In fact, it's going to soon be feeding back its own bad answers into itself, and that's going to be a problem. So there's a lot of different things I've addressed here, and you might go, well, I'm just addressing different things willy-nilly, and that's actually fair. But the big takeaway is one. Let's look at how this administrative complexity leads to a lot of instability. When we look at different elements of the administrative state, and that includes like the police department, for example, our social welfare, our schools, why is it that there's not a consistent opposition and capital base for some of them, and there are for others? So like the EPA was given in the example in the comments. Big business is always against it. The tourist industry is always for it. Conservationists are for it. Or, for example, particularly heavy industry really dislikes the EPA. But it actually hurts other elements of capital. Whereas who's siding with the police, or who's siding with the judiciary, or who's siding with the education department, that moves greatly and almost hard to predict immediate interest. But that's part of what Studebaker was talking about in his talk about this. Like, when you throw yourself up against parts of the states, where does it go? My only critique of Studebaker's writings that I've seen so far, and it doesn't mean that he won't address it, is that he's looked at this mostly from the standpoint of the state. He hasn't looked at this from the standpoint of the economy, and the two are interestingly intertwined. I did see him talk about that a little bit with Doug Lane on Diet Soap. So maybe in his next book, there'll be more to do with that. And it does come up in his book on democracies, but in his analysis of the fragmentary nature of the state, it just wasn't mentioned much. The funding mechanisms weren't mentioned much. So tie this in. Now, for the rest of you who think I'm ignoring all this, when I don't express things in the way that you like because I'm gearing it towards my audience, you can ask instead of critiquing me. Or you can live by the logic of differentiation, which everybody does, and try to make your name by critique. It doesn't really matter to me. You're going to do it probably anyway. But because you're part of the totality too, and it's not accepted from you. You're not special. And on that, keep you themselves.